The laughter hit me before I even reached the front of the line. It rolled through the grand hall of the Vashari flagship, bouncing off silver walls and crystal chandeliers shaped like frozen lightning. Hundreds of alien nobles turned their heads toward me, and every single one of them wore the same expression: amusement, pity, disdain. At the center of it all sat Princess Queen Aelira Vosh, heir to the Vashari Dominion throne, looking down at me from a raised platform with a smile that could freeze a sun. "This is the human they sent?" she said, her voice carrying easily through the silent hall. No medals, no rank markers, not even a proper uniform. Did the humans run out of real soldiers, or did they simply send me their newest recruit as a joke? The court laughed again, louder this time. I stood there in my plain gray fatigues, the same ones I had worn on 100 worlds, the same ones with no patches, no stripes, no stars. I did not smile, I did not flinch, I simply waited, the way I had waited through worse storms than this one. My name is Daniel Pierce, and 3 years ago I stopped wearing rank on my sleeve because rank draws attention, and attention gets people killed. I learned that lesson in blood, on a battlefield most of the people in this room would never understand, fighting an enemy that nearly erased my entire species from existence. But none of them knew that. To them, I was just a tired-looking man standing awkwardly at the end of a line of newly inducted coalition officers, waiting to be registered like cargo. "Well?" the Princess Queen said, leaning forward on her throne, clearly enjoying herself. "Nothing to say, rookie? No excuse for your appearance?" I gave her the only answer I had ever given to insults like this. I saluted. Simple, precise, silent. The gesture only made the court laugh harder. A few nobles whispered behind gloved hands. Someone near the front actually applauded, as if my silence was some kind of comedy performance. The Princess Queen waved a hand lazily, signaling the ceremony to continue, already losing interest in me. I stepped forward, ready to give my name to the registration officer standing beside the throne, an older Vashari aide with silver markings along his jaw. I opened my mouth to speak. "Officer Daniel Pierce," I said, "reporting for Coalition Integration." The aide's stylus, which had been moving quickly across his datapad, stopped completely. He looked up at me, then down at the pad, then back up at me, his silver markings shifting color slightly, the way Vashari skin does when their bodies react to something their minds have not caught up with yet. "Say that name again," he said quietly. "Daniel Pierce." The color drained from his face entirely. He did not respond to me. Instead, he turned toward the throne, moved past 2 guards without asking permission, and leaned in close to the Princess Queen's ear. I could not hear what he whispered, but I watched her face carefully, because I have spent my life learning to read faces in rooms that wanted me dead. Her smile did not fade slowly. It vanished all at once, like a light switched off in a dark room. Her eyes snapped to me, wide now, searching my face for something she clearly had not been looking for a moment ago. The easy amusement was gone. In its place was something closer to fear, quickly buried beneath a mask of forced composure. The whispering spread through the hall like fire through dry grass. Nobles leaned toward each other, exchanging words too fast and too quiet for me to catch, but I did not need to hear them. I had seen this reaction before, in different rooms, on different worlds, spoken in different languages. It was the sound of a name meaning something they never expected it to mean. The Princess Queen rose slowly from her throne, one hand gripping the armrest, as if she needed the support. She stared at me the way someone stares at a monster they were told was only a bedtime story, something invented to frighten children, not something that could actually be standing in front of them wearing plain gray fatigues. "That is not possible," she said, more to herself than to me. "The Ghost Admiral is a myth, a story the humans tell to make themselves feel less broken after the war." I said nothing. I had learned long ago that silence was often the strongest answer. The aide beside her leaned in again, speaking faster this time, and I caught a few fragments. "Service record. Confirmed. Verified through Central Command. Not a myth. Real. The Princess Queen's composure cracked further with every word. Around the hall, the mood had shifted completely. The laughter was gone, replaced by a tense, heavy silence, the kind of silence that fills a room right before something important happens. Nobles who had been smiling moments ago now stood frozen, unsure whether to bow, to stare, or to simply disappear into the crowd and pretend they had never laughed at all. I stood exactly where I had been standing the entire time, my posture unchanged, my expression calm. I was used to this reaction. It happened every time someone discovered who I really was, though I did everything in my power to prevent that discovery from ever happening. I did not want the attention. I never had. The Princess Queen straightened her back, clearly trying to reclaim some measure of control over a room that had just slipped entirely out of her hands. She was young for her position, barely into her second decade of rule preparation, and I could see the effort it took her to keep her voice steady. "Clear the hall," she said sharply. "Ceremony concluded. Officer Pierce, you will remain." The room emptied quickly, nobles filing out in stiff, uncertain rows, throwing glances back at me as they went, as if they expected me to transform into something else the moment their eyes left me. The registration officer gathered his datapad with shaking hands and hurried out through a side door. Within a few minutes, the enormous hall stood empty, except for the Princess Queen, two of her personal guards, and me. She stepped down from the platform slowly, her long ceremonial robes trailing behind her, and walked toward me with the careful, measured steps of someone trying very hard not to show how unsettled she felt. Up close, she looked younger than I expected, her golden eyes sharp with intelligence, but shadowed by something like uncertainty. "You let me humiliate myself," she said, her voice low and controlled, though I could hear the edge beneath it, "in front of my entire court. You said nothing. You did not ask for my file," I said simply. "You assumed. I did not correct you." "Why not?" "Because I did not come here to be recognized," I said. "I came here to serve quietly, the way I have served for the last 3 years. My past is not something I advertise, Princess. It causes more problems than it solves." She studied me for a long moment, her golden eyes narrowing slightly, as if she were trying to reconcile the plain, unremarkable man standing in front of her with whatever information her aide had just whispered into her ear. "You are the one who ended the Kestaru incursion," she said slowly, testing the words. "The commander who turned a 3% survival rate into total victory. The one 3 separate war colleges study as a warning to their own officers." "I prefer the term rookie," I said, allowing the smallest trace of dry humor into my voice. "It has a nice ring to it." For a moment, something flickered across her face that might have been the beginning of a real smile, quickly suppressed. She was not used to being challenged, even gently, and she clearly did not know what to do with it. "You find this amusing," she said. "I find it familiar," I said. "People underestimate quiet men in gray uniforms all the time. It has kept me alive more often than any weapon I have ever carried." She turned away from me then, walking a slow circle around the empty hall, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, deep in thought. The 2 guards near the throne remained perfectly still, watching the exchange with wide, uncertain eyes, clearly unsure what to make of their princess speaking so directly with a man she had mocked only minutes earlier. "My court will not forget what just happened," she said finally, stopping near one of the tall crystal windows that overlooked the endless black of space outside. They laughed at a legend and called him a rookie. "That story will spread through the Dominion faster than any official announcement I could make." "Stories tend to do that," I said. "This is not amusing to me, Officer Pierce," she said sharply, spinning back toward me. "I am the heir to this throne. My reputation, my authority, everything I have worked to build depends on the respect of the people in that hall, and in one moment, standing beside a man in an unmarked uniform, all of it became a joke." I studied her carefully then, seeing past the anger to something underneath it. Fear. Not fear of me, but fear of failing, fear of not being taken seriously, fear that had probably followed her through every single day of her life since the moment she was named heir. I understood that fear better than she could possibly know. "Then let me offer you something in return," I said quietly, "a chance to turn this moment into something other than an embarrassment." She looked at me, wary but listening. "Give me a private audience," I said. "Ask me whatever you want to know. Decide for yourself what kind of man is standing in front of you, instead of relying on rumors and old war files. Whatever you decide afterward, I will accept it without argument." The Princess Queen studied me for a long, silent moment, the tension in her shoulders slowly easing, though the wariness in her golden eyes never fully disappeared. "Very well," she said at last. "Follow me, Officer Pierce." She turned and walked toward a side corridor without waiting to see if I would follow, her robes sweeping across the polished floor, her guards falling into step behind her. I followed a few paces back, matching her pace exactly, the way I had learned to walk beside commanders and kings and desperate survivors alike, never rushing, never lagging, always ready. Behind us, the massive hall stood silent and empty, still holding the echo of laughter that had turned, in the space of a single whispered name, into something far more complicated. I did not know it yet, but that quiet walk down an unfamiliar corridor was about to lead both of us into a battle that neither of us could have predicted, one that would test every assumption she had ever made about strength, and every promise I had ever made to myself about staying hidden. The war I thought I had left behind was not finished with me yet, and somewhere out in the dark beyond that crystal window, it was already moving closer. 3 years earlier, I stood on the bridge of a ship that should not have survived the night. The Kestaru fleet had surrounded what remained of Earth's defense, over 200 warships against our final 19. Every strategist in human command had already written our story as a loss. The official orders that reached me that night were simple and brutal. Hold the line as long as possible. Buy time for the evacuation ships. Expect no survivors. I remember the silence on the bridge when those orders came through. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. We all understood what we were being asked to do. My crew looked to me for something, some plan, some trick, some reason to believe the next few hours would not be their last. I did not have one. Not at first. What I had was a stubborn refusal to accept the mathematics being handed to me, and a mind that had spent years studying every mistake every commander before me had ever made. I ordered the fleet to scatter instead of hold formation, a move that violated every piece of standard doctrine we had been trained on. The Kestaru commanders, confident and overconfident in equal measure, spread their own forces thin to chase us down individually, exactly as I had gambled they would. That gamble bought us 6 hours. 6 hours became enough time to lure their main battle group into a narrow debris field left over from an old mining accident decades earlier, a graveyard of broken asteroids that most captains would have considered impossible to navigate safely. I had studied that debris field for years before the war even started, back when I was nothing more than a junior officer with too much curiosity and not enough rank to matter. I knew every rock in that field the way most people know the layout of their own homes. The Kestaru fleet did not. What followed was not really a battle in the traditional sense. It was closer to watching a predator chase its prey into a trap built entirely from patience and knowledge nobody else had bothered to gather. Their ships, faster and more numerous than ours, tore themselves apart on debris they never saw coming, while my scattered fleet regrouped behind them and closed the trap from the other side. By the time the sun rose over what remained of Earth's orbital defenses, the Kestaru command fleet had been reduced to a handful of crippled vessels, their commanders broadcasting surrender on every channel we had. I did not celebrate that day. I remember standing on the bridge, looking at the wreckage scattered across our screens, and feeling nothing close to victory. I felt exhaustion. I felt grief for the 11 ships we had lost anyway, despite everything. I felt the weight of every name I would have to write letters about in the coming weeks. The people back on Earth called it a miracle, War colleges across a dozen different alien empires later called it the single greatest tactical reversal ever recorded, studied in academies I will never visit, taught to officers who will never know my face. They gave me a title I never asked for. The Ghost Admiral, a name born from the way my ships seemed to appear and disappear across the battlefield that night, striking from angles the enemy could never predict, vanishing before they could respond. I hated the name at first. Now I simply avoid it. Fame, I learned quickly, is not a reward. It is a target painted onto your back, visible from every corner of known space. Every enemy who ever heard that name wanted to be the one who finally erased it. Every ally who ever heard it wanted something from the man attached to it. Favors, endorsements, political weight I never wanted to carry. So when the war finally ended and humanity was folded into the wider coalition of civilized worlds, I made a choice. I stripped my uniform of every marking, buried my service record under enough classification layers to keep it hidden from casual searches, and requested a quiet posting far from any battlefield that mattered. I wanted to disappear into the background of a much larger galaxy, to become exactly what the Princess Queen had accused me of being in that grand hall only hours ago. A rookie, unremarkable, forgettable. For 3 years, it worked. Walking beside her now, through corridors lined with silver and crystal, I understood that my quiet life had just ended the moment her aide read my file aloud. The Princess Queen led me into a smaller chamber, private and softly lit, far removed from the grandeur of the ceremony hall. She dismissed her guards at the door with a sharp gesture, leaving only the two of us inside, along with a low table set with drinks neither of us had touched. She sat first, gesturing for me to take the seat across from her, and studied me for a long moment before speaking. "I want to understand something," she said. "How does a man capable of what your file describes stand quietly in a room full of strangers laughing at him, and say nothing in his own defense?" "Because their laughter did not change anything," I said. "It did not undo the battles I fought. It did not erase the people I lost. Words from strangers who know nothing about me carry very little weight, Princess. I learned that lesson a long time ago. Most soldiers I have met crave recognition," she said. "They wear their victories like armor, announce their rank before they announce their name. You do the opposite. Why?" I considered the question carefully before answering, because it deserved an honest response, not a rehearsed one. "Recognition invites comparison," I said. "It invites challenge. Every young commander who ever heard my name wanted to prove they could beat the tactics I used, prove the Ghost Admiral was not as clever as the stories claimed. Recognition turns you into a target for people who have never even met you. I did not survive that war to spend the rest of my life defending a reputation instead of living a life." She was quiet for a moment, turning that answer over in her mind. "And yet here you are," she said. "Recognized anyway." "Here I am," I agreed. "Accidents happen." A faint, reluctant smile touched the corner of her mouth before she caught herself and smoothed her expression back into something more composed. I noticed the effort it took her, the way she seemed to constantly monitor her own face, her own posture, as if a single unguarded moment might undo years of careful training. "You must think me foolish," she said quietly, laughing at a man I knew nothing about, in front of my entire court. "I think you made an assumption," I said. "Everyone does it. I have made worse ones myself. The difference is what a person does after they learn the truth. And what would you have me do?" "Whatever feels honest to you," I said. "Not what protects your image, not what your advisors will tell you looks strong, just whatever you actually believe is right." She studied me carefully, as if trying to determine whether my answer was some kind of trap, a clever manipulation designed to earn her trust. I understood her caution. In a court built entirely on hierarchy and bloodline, honesty without an agenda probably seemed as rare and suspicious as it was refreshing. "Tell me about your people," she said instead, shifting the conversation. "Before the war, what were humans like, before you needed to become soldiers?" I told her, briefly, about the world I remembered before everything changed. about cities built without any concept of alien contact, about the strange mixture of curiosity and fear that gripped humanity the moment we realized we were not alone in the universe, about how quickly ordinary people, teachers, farmers, engineers, had been forced to become fighters when survival demanded it. She listened closely, her golden eyes fixed on me with an intensity that suggested this conversation mattered to her far more than simple curiosity would explain. I began to understand, gradually, that the Princess Queen carried burdens of her own, pressures placed on her by a bloodline hierarchy that expected strength she had not yet been given the chance to prove. "My people have never lost a war the way yours nearly did," she said quietly after a long pause. "We have never been pushed to the very edge of extinction and pulled ourselves back from it. Sometimes I wonder if that makes us stronger, or if it simply means we have never truly been tested. Tests come for everyone eventually," I said. Sometimes, without warning. As if the universe itself had been listening for that exact sentence, a sharp alarm cut through the quiet chamber, red light pulsing along the walls, replacing the soft glow that had filled the room only moments before. The Princess Queen rose immediately, her posture straightening, all traces of the quiet, uncertain young woman I had been speaking with vanishing behind a mask of practiced authority. A voice crackled through a nearby communication panel, urgent and clipped. "Princess Queen, forgive the intrusion. We have received an emergency distress signal from the Halvith border colony. Unknown hostile forces are engaging the outer defense grid. Casualties reported. The colony command is requesting immediate reinforcement." The Princess Queen's hand tightened around the edge of the table. "Fleet status," she said sharply. "3 battle groups are within response range, Princess Queen. Command structure requires an officer of royal authority to lead the response, per your father's standing order regarding border engagements." I watched something shift behind her eyes, a flicker of fear quickly buried beneath determination. The same look I had seen on countless young officers standing at the edge of their very first real battle, understanding for the first time that training and theory were about to collide violently with reality. She turned toward me, and for a moment neither of us said anything. "I have never commanded a battle group in an active engagement," she said quietly, her voice dropping so only I could hear it. "My training has been political, diplomatic. I know the theory. I have run simulations. I have never done this." "Then this is your test," I said, "the one you were just wondering if you would ever face." Her jaw tightened, and I could see the enormous weight of expectation pressing down on her shoulders, the entire Dominion watching to see whether their heir could stand where it truly mattered, not in a ceremonial hall surrounded by silk and silver, but in the cold reality of an actual fight. "Come with me," she said suddenly, surprising both of us with the request. "I am not assigned to your command staff, Princess." "You are now," she said. "Consider it my first order as your commanding officer." I studied her for a long moment, weighing the quiet life I had built for myself against the pull of something I recognized instantly, the unmistakable shape of a battle already forming in the dark, beyond the ship's hull, and the desperate need of people who had no idea help was even a possibility yet. "Yes, Princess Queen," I said finally. She turned and moved quickly toward the door, guards falling into formation around her the moment she stepped into the corridor, urgency replacing the careful, measured pace she had used earlier. I followed close behind, my heartbeat settling into the familiar, steady rhythm I remembered from every battle before this one, a rhythm that had gone quiet for 3 peaceful years, and was now, without warning, awake again. Somewhere beyond the ship's hull, an enemy fleet was already tearing through a defenseless colony, and a frightened young heir with no real combat experience was about to lead an entire battle group into the fight of her life. I had promised myself I would never step onto a bridge like this again. That promise was about to be broken. The command shuttle ride to the battle group flagship took 11 minutes, and I spent every one of them watching the Princess Queen fight to keep her hands from shaking. She noticed me watching. She always seemed to notice everything, which told me something important about her, something the laughing courtiers in that grand hall would never have guessed. Underneath the polished title and the ceremonial robes was a mind that paid close attention, that absorbed details other people missed. That kind of attention could be trained into real skill, given time. The problem was that time was the one thing neither of us had right now. "Tell me what I am walking into," she said, her voice low enough that her guards, seated further back in the shuttle, would not overhear. "You already have a report," I said. "Read it to me. I want to hear what you understood from it, not what it said word for word." She hesitated, clearly surprised by the request, but pulled up the data on a small handheld panel and began speaking. "Unidentified hostile fleet, estimated at 40 vessels, engaged the Halveth colony defense grid 19 minutes ago. Colony shields are holding, but degrading. 2 of our automated patrol ships were destroyed on initial contact. The enemy fleet formation does not match any known Dominion adversary in our current threat database." "What does that tell you?" I asked. She frowned, thinking it through rather than simply repeating data back at me. "That whoever they are, we have not fought them before," she said slowly, "which means our tactical database has nothing useful to offer us. We are going in blind." "Not entirely blind," I said. "Describe the formation pattern again." She read through the data once more carefully this time. "Spread wide at the edges, tightly clustered near the center, moving in staggered waves rather than a single coordinated line." Something cold settled in my chest as she described it, a feeling I recognized instantly, one I had hoped never to feel again. I had seen that exact formation before, on a night 3 years ago that I had spent every day since trying to leave behind me. "That formation has a name," I said quietly. "Wave clustering. It is not something new, it is something old, refined by an enemy who learned it from watching other fleets die trying to counter it." The Princess Queen looked up sharply. "You know this enemy." "I know this pattern," I corrected her. "The Kestaru used it during the final months of the war against Earth, before I broke their command structure apart in the debris field. If this is a remnant force, splinter groups that scattered after their empire collapsed, they may have kept using the same tactics that once nearly worked against us." "You believe the empire that nearly destroyed your homeworld has resurfaced, attacking my border colony?" "I believe it is possible," I said, "and if I am right, your standard fleet doctrine will not be enough to stop them. Wave clustering is designed specifically to break apart conventional formations. It exploits predictable responses." She absorbed that information in silence, her jaw tightening, the weight of command settling more heavily onto her shoulders with every passing second. When the shuttle finally docked with the flagship, she stood immediately, straightening her robes with practiced precision, forcing calm into every movement, even though I could still see the tension coiled beneath her composure. "Walk beside me," she said quietly as the shuttle doors opened. "Not behind me, beside me. I want my staff to understand. You are here to advise, not simply to observe." I nodded once, and we stepped out together into the wide, echoing corridor of the battle group flagship, a ship built for war in a way the ceremonial vessel we had left behind never had been. Officers moved briskly past us in every direction, urgency written into every hurried step, every clipped exchange of orders. The command center, when we reached it, was a wide circular chamber dominated by a massive holographic display showing the unfolding battle in real time. Dozens of officers manned stations around the perimeter, their voices overlapping in a controlled storm of reports and updates. At the center of the room stood a tall Vashari officer with severe, angular features and a uniform heavy with decoration, clearly the senior tactical commander assigned to the battle group. He turned as we entered, his eyes flicking briefly to me with obvious dismissal before settling on the Princess Queen with a respectful but strained expression. "Princess Queen," he said, "Fleet Commander Threll Voss, at your service. I must inform you that the situation has deteriorated since your departure was authorized. The colony's outer shield generators are failing faster than projected. Casualties? She asked immediately. Colony ground forces report significant losses. Civilian evacuation is underway but slower than we hoped. If the shields fail before our fleet arrives, we are looking at a catastrophic loss of life. The Princess Queen's face remained composed, but I saw the flicker of horror pass behind her eyes before she buried it beneath the calm authority her position demanded. Time to arrival? She asked. 22 minutes, Princess Queen, assuming we do not encounter resistance before reaching the colony's defensive perimeter. Show me the enemy formation, she said. Commander Threll gestured, and the holographic display shifted to show a wide field of red markers representing hostile ships, arranged exactly as the report had described, wide at the edges, densely clustered near the center, advancing in staggered waves against the colony's defense grid. I studied the display carefully, every instinct I had spent 3 years trying to quiet, coming back to life at once. The formation was unmistakable. I had faced it before, studied every angle of it, learned every weakness it carried buried beneath its intimidating structure. This does not match anything in our tactical archive, Commander Threll said, frustration evident in his voice. Our standard response doctrine assumes symmetrical engagement patterns. I have already ordered our battle group into the recommended defensive counter formation, but I confess, I have limited confidence in its effectiveness against something this unfamiliar. Cancel that order, I said. The room went silent. Every officer near the central display turned toward me, several with expressions ranging from confusion to open irritation at the interruption from an unmarked, unranked human standing beside their princess. Commander Threll's eyes narrowed. And you are? He is under my authority, the Princess Queen said quickly, before I could answer. His recommendations carry my endorsement. Explain your reasoning, Officer Pierce. I stepped closer to the holographic display, studying the enemy formation with the same focus I had once brought to a battlefield that had determined whether my entire species survived the night. This formation is designed to punish symmetrical responses, I said. The wide edges appear vulnerable, inviting a flanking maneuver. Any fleet that takes that bait finds its flanking ships isolated and picked apart by the staggered center waves, which rotate reinforcement faster than a standard formation can compensate for. Your recommended counter formation will walk directly into that trap. Commander Threll's expression shifted from irritation to something more uncertain. You speak as though you have faced this exact tactic before. I have, I said simply, offering no further explanation. The Princess Queen glanced at me, understanding immediately why I chose not to elaborate in front of a room full of strangers, and said nothing to correct my silence. What do you propose instead? Commander Threll asked, his tone shifting, the dismissal in his voice replaced by cautious curiosity. Do not spread to meet their width, I said. Concentrate your forces into a narrow, mobile spearhead aimed directly at the seam between their staggered waves. Their formation depends on coordinated rotation between clusters. If you strike the seam hard and fast, before they can adjust, you disrupt the rotation entirely. The formation that looks unbreakable from the outside becomes fragile the moment its internal timing collapses. Silence stretched through the command center as officers considered the proposal, several exchanging uncertain glances, clearly unaccustomed to such a dramatic departure from established doctrine. That is an aggressive approach, Commander Threll said slowly. If the seam does not collapse as predicted, we would be committing our entire spearhead directly into the heart of their strongest concentration. It would, I said. I have seen it before. But I understand the risk, and I understand why trusting a stranger's word is difficult when an entire colony's survival depends on the decision. The Princess Queen stepped forward then, her voice steady, carrying clearly across the command center despite the tension gripping the room. I have made my decision, she said. We proceed with Officer Pierce's proposed formation. Commander Threll, issue the updated orders to all battle group captains immediately. Commander Threll hesitated only a moment before nodding sharply. years of discipline overriding whatever doubts remained in his expression. "Yes, Princess Queen." Issuing new formation orders now. As the command center exploded into renewed activity, officers relaying updated instructions across dozens of channels, the Princess Queen turned to me, her golden eyes searching my face. "You are certain about this," she said quietly, only for me to hear. "I am certain about the enemy's formation," I said. "I am not certain about anything else. War never offers certainty, Princess, only probability, and the willingness to act on it before the moment passes. And if you are wrong, then we will adjust," I said. "That is the only promise anyone can make you in the middle of a fight like this one." She held my gaze for a long moment, and I saw something settle behind her eyes. Not certainty exactly, but a kind of resolve I recognized from every young officer I had ever watched grow into a real commander under fire. She was afraid. She was going to act anyway. That combination, more than any amount of confidence, was what actually mattered. "Then let us adjust quickly, if we must," she said, turning back toward the holographic display, her voice carrying the first real note of authority I had heard from her since we boarded the shuttle. The battle group flagship surged forward, joined by the rest of the response fleet forming into the narrow, aggressive spearhead formation I had proposed, cutting directly through open space toward the distant glow of the besieged colony. I watched the distance close on the holographic display, watched the red markers of the enemy fleet grow larger and more detailed as our sensors gathered better data, confirming everything I had suspected the moment I saw that formation. The ship configurations matched, the weapon signatures matched. Even the subtle, staggered rhythm of their advance matched patterns I had studied obsessively for months after the war ended, determined to understand every possible variation the enemy might attempt if they ever returned. They had returned. Whether this splinter force answered to any surviving Kestaru command structure or simply carried forward the tactics of an empire that no longer officially existed, I could not yet say. What I did know, with absolute certainty, was that the fight unfolding ahead of us was not going to be simple, and the young Princess Queen standing beside me, about to lead her first real battle, had no idea just how personal this particular enemy was about to become for the quiet, unranked man she had laughed at only hours earlier. 12 minutes to engagement range, Commander Threll announced, his voice carrying across the command center. The Princess Queen straightened her shoulders, drawing a slow, steady breath, and turned to address her assembled officers with a calm authority that, only hours ago, I would not have believed she possessed. "All stations, prepare for engagement," she said. "We are not here to survive this fight. We are here to win it." I felt something shift in my chest as I listened to her, an old, familiar readiness rising back to the surface after 3 years of careful, deliberate silence. I had built a quiet life specifically to avoid standing in a room like this one ever again. But the enemy waiting for us beyond the colony's failing shields did not care about the life I had wanted to build. They never did. And as the flagship pushed forward into the dark, carrying an untested young heir and a legend she had not believed existed only that morning, I understood with complete clarity that whatever quiet future I had once imagined for myself was going to have to wait a little longer. The fight was coming, whether I was ready for it or not. I was ready. I had never really stopped being ready. The first enemy volley hit our lead ships before we ever reached firing range, and I knew immediately something was wrong. "They are firing beyond effective range," Commander Threll said, confusion evident in his voice, as damage reports began flooding in from the forward vessels. "That should be impossible with their weapon signatures." "It is not impossible," I said, watching the holographic display carefully. "It is a feint. They want you to believe their range exceeds ours, so you slow your advance and reposition. The moment you do, their center clusters will surge forward and close the gap before you can recover formation." "How do you know this?" Commander Threll demanded, though his hands were already moving across his console, adjusting orders even as he questioned me. "Because I have watched this exact deception work on commanders far more experienced than either of us," I said, Hold your spearhead formation. Do not slow. Do not reposition. Trust the plan. The Princess Queen, standing rigid beside the display, looked at me with wide eyes, the sudden violence of real combat clearly shaking something loose inside her that no amount of simulation training could have prepared her for. I recognized that look. Every commander wore it during their first true battle. The moment theory became something with real weight and real consequences. Hold formation, she said, her voice tight but clear enough to carry across the command center. All ships, maintain current heading and speed. The enemy's second volley landed closer this time, and 2 of our escort vessels took serious damage, their status indicators flashing amber warnings across the holographic display. I watched Commander Threll's jaw tighten, watched the temptation to abandon the plan flicker visibly across his face. "Steady," I said quietly, mostly for the Princess Queen's benefit. "This is the moment they are counting on. The moment you break." She did not break. "Maintain heading," she repeated, louder this time, her voice steadier than it had been a moment before. Our spearhead formation surged closer, cutting through the gap between the enemy's staggered wave clusters exactly as I had predicted, and for a brief, terrifying moment, I watched the enemy formation hesitate, their rotation timing thrown into visible confusion as our ships pushed directly into the seam they had never expected anyone to target. "Their center is breaking formation," an officer near the display called out, disbelief evident in her voice. "They are attempting to reposition, but their rotation is falling out of sync." "Now," I said, "concentrate fire on the seam. Do not let them recover their timing." Commander Threll relayed the order without hesitation this time, his earlier skepticism completely replaced by focused urgency. Our spearhead's forward ships opened fire directly into the confused gap between enemy clusters, and I watched the holographic display light up with the chaotic bloom of destroyed vessels. Enemy ships caught completely out of position, unable to defend themselves against an attack their formation had never been designed to survive. For a moment, it looked like the plan was working perfectly. Then the enemy did something I had not expected. A second wave of ships, previously hidden behind sensor interference near the colony's outer debris field, surged forward from an angle our formation had left completely unguarded, moving to encircle our spearhead from behind. "New contacts," an officer shouted, alarm spreading rapidly through the command center. "Enemy reinforcements, flanking from the rear. We did not detect them in the original sensor sweep." The Princess Queen's composure cracked visibly, her eyes widening as the holographic display filled with a second cluster of red markers, closing rapidly on our exposed rear flank. Commander Threll began issuing rapid, uncertain orders, the careful discipline of moments earlier dissolving into something closer to panic as the situation spiraled beyond anything our plan had accounted for. I felt the old, familiar clarity settle over me, the same sharp, focused calm that had carried me through the worst night of the Kestaru War 3 years ago. This was the moment that separated survival from disaster, the moment that demanded absolute decisiveness rather than hesitation. "Princess Queen," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the rising chaos of the command center, "I need authority to issue direct fleet orders. Now, there is no time to explain." She looked at me for the span of a single heartbeat, weighing everything, the trust she had extended to me in that quiet chamber only hours earlier, the battle unfolding violently around us, the lives of her entire response fleet hanging in the balance of whatever decision she made next. "Do it," she said. "Full authority, now." I moved to the central console without another word, my hands finding the controls with a familiarity that felt like returning to a language I had never truly forgotten, despite 3 years of trying. "All forward ships, break spearhead formation and pivot 30 degrees toward the enemy's exposed leading edge," I said, my voice steady, carrying an authority I had not used in years but which returned to me instantly, unforced. "Rear escort vessels, do not retreat from the flanking force. Turn and engage directly. Concentrate fire on their lead ships only. Force them to slow their advance." "That will expose our rear escorts to concentrated fire," Commander Threll said, though he was already relaying the orders even as he voiced the concern. "It will," I said, "but it buys the exact amount of time our forward ships need to finish breaking their center formation. Their flanking force is fast but thin. If we force them to slow down and fight instead of simply sweeping around us, they lose the only advantage that maneuver offered them." The next several minutes unfolded in a blur of controlled chaos, orders flowing rapidly from the command center to every ship in the response fleet, each adjustment calculated to exploit the narrow, shifting weaknesses I could see forming and collapsing across the holographic display. I moved through the battle the way I always had, not with the frantic energy the rest of the command center displayed, but with a steady, almost eerie calm, watching patterns emerge from chaos, the way other people watched clouds shift shape in an open sky. The Princess Queen stood close beside me throughout, watching everything, absorbing every decision, every adjustment, asking sharp, precise questions whenever a spare moment allowed it, learning in real time the way no simulation could ever teach her. "Why did you not retreat the rear escorts instead of ordering them to engage?" she asked during one brief lull, her voice quick and focused despite the tension gripping the room. "Because retreat would have scattered them, and scattered ships die faster than ships fighting together, even against worse odds," I said. "Sometimes the safest choice is the one that looks the most dangerous on the surface." She absorbed that lesson quickly, filing it away the way I imagined she filed away every piece of information that crossed her path, building toward the kind of leader her people would eventually need her to become. Slowly, gradually, the tide of the battle began to shift. Our forward ships finished collapsing the enemy's center formation entirely, destroying or disabling the majority of their staggered clusters before they could ever recover their timing. The flanking force, forced to slow and fight rather than sweep freely around our rear, found itself caught between our re-engaged escorts and the reinforcements Commander Threll redirected the moment the center formation collapsed. What had looked, only minutes earlier, like an unstoppable trap closing around us, transformed instead into a decisive rout, enemy vessels scattering in disorganized retreat, their surviving ships fleeing toward the edge of sensor range rather than face the reformed strength of our response fleet. "They are retreating," an officer called out, disbelief evident in her voice. "All remaining enemy contacts are breaking off and withdrawing." A wave of exhausted relief swept through the command center, officers slumping slightly at their stations, the tension of the past several minutes finally beginning to release its grip. The Princess Queen closed her eyes briefly, drawing a long, unsteady breath, before opening them again, her composure returning slowly, piece by piece. "Casualty report," she said quietly. "Significant damage across the fleet, Princess Queen," Commander Threll said, reviewing the incoming data. "But no complete losses. Every ship remains operational or salvageable. Colony shields held throughout the engagement. Civilian evacuation completed successfully before the enemy withdrawal." The Princess Queen closed her eyes again, this time longer, and I understood, watching her, that she was allowing herself, for just a moment, to feel the full weight of what had almost happened and what had, against significant odds, actually been prevented. "We won," she said quietly, almost as if she needed to hear the words spoken aloud to believe them. "You won," I said. "I only offered advice. Every order that mattered came from you." She opened her eyes and looked at me, something complicated moving behind her golden gaze, gratitude tangled together with something that looked almost like wonder. "You saved this fleet," she said. "You saved this colony." "We saved them," I corrected gently. "Together. That is how it should be remembered." Around us, the command center slowly settled into the quieter rhythms of aftermath, officers exchanging relieved glances, damage control teams already coordinating repairs across the fleet, medical teams preparing to receive the wounded. The immediate danger had passed, but I understood, standing there in the fading adrenaline of a battle I had never planned to fight, that something larger had shifted as well. The Princess Queen, who had laughed at an unremarkable rookie only hours earlier, no longer existed in quite the same way. In her place stood someone who had faced the true weight of command, who had trusted a stranger's counsel in the middle of chaos, and lived to understand exactly why that trust had mattered. Whatever came next, for either of us, was not going to look the same as it had before that alarm ever sounded. News of the battle reached the Vashari court long before our fleet returned to dock, and by the time the flagship settled into its berth, the story had already spread through every level of the Dominion's hierarchy, growing more dramatic with each retelling. I did not care much for the exaggerations. What mattered to me was standing quietly at the edge of the docking bay, watching the Princess Queen step off the ship first, her posture steady despite the exhaustion visible beneath her calm expression, greeted by a crowd of nobles and officials who had gathered to witness her return. Among them stood the same court that had laughed with her only hours earlier, back in that grand ceremonial hall, mocking an unmarked human officer they assumed carried no significance at all. Their expressions now carried nothing resembling that earlier amusement. The Princess Queen walked slowly through the gathered crowd, and I watched carefully as nobles who had laughed the loudest lowered their eyes, unable to meet her gaze, clearly uncertain how to reconcile the frightened, untested air they remembered with the composed young leader who had just returned from commanding a fleet through a battle few of them could have survived themselves. She stopped at the center of the docking bay and turned, searching the crowd until her eyes found me, standing a respectful distance back, exactly where I preferred to remain. "Officer Pierce," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent bay. "Join me." I hesitated only briefly before stepping forward, aware of every eye in the crowd tracking my movement, the same nobles who had dismissed me as a joke, now watching with an entirely different kind of attention. When I reached her side, she turned to address the assembled court, her voice steady and clear, carrying none of the uncertainty that had colored her words back in that quiet chamber before the battle began. "Several hours ago, in this very palace, I mocked this man in front of all of you," she said. "I looked at his uniform, saw no rank, no decoration, and decided he was unworthy of respect before I ever bothered to learn his name." The crowd remained utterly silent, hanging on every word. "I was wrong," she continued. "Not simply mistaken, but genuinely, deeply wrong, in a way that nearly cost me the wisdom that ultimately saved this fleet and the entire Halvith colony. Officer Daniel Pierce is not a rookie. He is the commander known across a dozen war colleges as the Ghost Admiral, the man who single-handedly reversed humanity's darkest hour and ended the Kestaru incursion against odds every strategist alive considered impossible." A murmur rippled through the crowd, quiet but unmistakable, the sound of a story shifting permanently in the retelling from this moment forward. "He did not announce this to me," the Princess Queen continued. "He did not correct my mistake in front of this court, even when I gave him every reason to embarrass me publicly the way I had embarrassed him. Instead, when the moment came that truly mattered, when lives depended on someone making the right decision under impossible pressure, he stood beside me and helped me become the leader my people need me to be, without ever once demanding credit or recognition for himself." She turned to face me directly then, her golden eyes steady, holding none of the wariness or suspicion that had colored our earlier conversations. "I judged a man by the absence of decoration on his uniform," she said, quieter now, though her voice still carried across the silent bay. "I have learned, in the most difficult way possible, that the medals a person wears say very little about the strength they actually carry. Some of the most powerful people I will ever meet may choose to wear no medals at all." I inclined my head slightly, acknowledging her words without offering any response that might draw further attention toward myself. She seemed to understand that instinct in me by now, because rather than pressing for a reply, she simply turned back to address the rest of the assembled court. "From this day forward, Officer Pierce will serve as a permanent advisor to my command staff, with full authority to counsel on matters of fleet strategy and tactical planning," she announced. "Any officer who forgets to extend him the respect his service has earned will answer directly to me." The crowd responded with a wave of formal acknowledgement, bows and salutes rippling through the gathered nobles, a stark contrast to the laughter that had filled this same palace only hours earlier. I noticed several of the loudest laughers from before, now among the most eager to demonstrate their respect, and I found the shift more amusing than satisfying, a reminder of how quickly opinion could turn once the truth became impossible to ignore. Later, after the crowd had dispersed and the formal ceremony had given way to quieter, private conversations among the fleet's senior officers, the Princess Queen found me standing alone near the same crystal window where our first private conversation had taken place, looking out at the endless dark beyond the ship's hull. "You never wanted any of that," she said, joining me at the window. "The announcement, the recognition, I could see it on your face while I was speaking." "I understood why you needed to say it," I said. "Your court needed to see their princess correct her own mistake publicly, in order to trust her judgment going forward. That mattered more than my personal comfort with the attention." "Even so," she said, "thank you for allowing me that moment, even though I know it cost you something." I considered her words for a moment before answering honestly. It did cost me something. My quiet life is likely finished now, at least for a while, but I have learned, over the years, that some costs are worth paying if the outcome earns real trust in return. She was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the same dark expanse of space I had been studying, her expression thoughtful rather than troubled. "I misjudged you the moment I saw you," she said. "I want to understand how to avoid making that same mistake again, with someone else, in the future. Teach me. Judge people by what they do when the stakes are highest, not by what they wear or how they present themselves in comfortable moments," I said. "Uniforms, titles, decorations, none of that reveals character. Only pressure does. You saw that today. In the middle of a battle neither of us expected to fight." "I will remember that," she said, and I believed her. We stood together in comfortable silence for a while longer, two very different people who had begun the day as strangers, separated by mockery and misunderstanding, now bound together by something far more durable, forged in the kind of crisis that revealed exactly who a person truly was, underneath every layer of assumption and expectation. "What happens now," she asked eventually, "for you, now that your past has caught up with you, whether you wanted it to or not?" "I suppose I adapt," I said, "the same way I have adapted to every unexpected turn since this war first found me. I will not chase the recognition your court seems eager to offer, but I will not run from it either, not if it means I can help prevent tragedies like today's from happening again. The Dominion could use someone like you, permanently," she said, "not simply as an advisor buried in the background, but as someone willing to help shape how we prepare for threats we do not yet fully understand. That enemy fleet today was not simply an isolated raid," I said, my thoughts returning to the wave-clustering formation that had haunted me the moment I recognized it. "The tactics were too precise, too deliberately calibrated, to exploit exactly the kind of unfamiliarity your command staff displayed. Someone taught them that formation recently, someone who understood exactly how unprepared your forces would be to counter it." The Princess Queen's expression sharpened, the exhaustion of the day briefly replaced by focused attention. "You believe this was not a random attack?" "I believe we should not assume it was," I said. "The Kestaru Empire that once nearly destroyed my homeworld was broken apart after the war. But broken empires leave behind survivors, and survivors sometimes find new purposes, new alliances, new reasons to test old tactics against new enemies." She absorbed that possibility carefully, and I watched the weight of leadership settle onto her shoulders once more. No longer the uncertain burden of theoretical training, but the informed responsibility of someone who had now witnessed exactly what real conflict demanded of her. "Then we will need to prepare properly," she said. "Not simply react to whatever comes next, but understand it before it arrives." "That is usually the difference between survival and disaster," I said. "I learned that lesson the hard way, a long time ago." "I would rather help you learn it without paying quite as steep a price as I did." She studied me for a long moment, something like genuine respect settling behind her golden eyes, entirely different from the dismissive amusement that had greeted me only hours earlier in that same palace. "Then I am glad my court laughed at you today," she said, a faint, wry smile touching her lips. "Otherwise, I might never have discovered exactly what kind of man I nearly dismissed." "I would have preferred a quieter introduction," I said, "but I suppose some lessons only arrive the hard way." Outside the crystal window, the vast darkness of space stretched endlessly in every direction, hiding within it whatever threats still remained from a war I had once believed was finished, and whatever new dangers waited beyond the borders of a dominion that had just discovered, in the most dramatic way possible, exactly how unprepared it truly was. I did not know yet what challenges lay ahead, what battles still waited somewhere in that endless dark, or how deeply my quiet, careful life would continue to unravel in the days to come. What I did know, standing beside a young leader who had begun the day laughing at a rookie and ended it commanding a fleet through her first real battle, was that the story people would tell about this moment was only just beginning. And somewhere far beyond the reach of the Dominion's censors, in the cold silence between distant stars, something was already watching, already planning, already preparing for whatever came next. The war I thought I had left behind was not finished with either of us yet. It was only getting started,